Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, everyone. This is Tammy Patzer, and I'm really excited because today I have one of the New York City Marathon legends and founders, Vincent Chiappetta. Vincent has been part of the runner's history since the 50s, and I know that the New York City Marathon is coming up on its 50th anniversary. So I thought today's interview, Vincent, if it's okay with you, that I would ask you a little bit more about the New York City Marathon and some of the highlights, because I know that you've been instrumental not only in helping to create the New York City Marathon, but instrumental in opening up the world of running to ordinary people. And when I say ordinary people, I mean all people, women, gay people, lesbian people, just all people, men, people who may not have always been allowed to participate in some of these activities. So I know the audience is interested in that. And then what we're really interested in is your work as an artist and a poet, and you have a best-selling book called New York as We Know It. So I wanted to ask you about that because not only does New York as We Know It include poetry that you've written over the years, but it also includes some art, and I'm really curious to know more about both your art and your poetry. But before we get started, if you can just tell me a little bit about your running history, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, my running history started in 1948 when I joined the track team at James Monroe High School. I was involved with all the athletics, but I didn't like the team approach that coaches had and the way they chose people. And somebody talked me into trying out for track, and I'm liking that very much because I had a great coach, and also it was more something wrong my line. I could take charge of the whole thing myself. And you can always run. So it became a very important part of my life, and actually led to myself getting a scholarship at NYU to go to college, which I couldn't afford anyway, and allowed me to go to graduate school later too. So it's been a big benefit to my life, and I've been involved with it since that time. I got involved in the running part of it after college because of rules I thought should be changed, and gradually became head of various organizations that led to improving the finding out of long distance running. It is fun and it's a benefit to people. And one of the big things, of course, was working on the attitude of getting women involved in long distance running. And the New York group always allowed women to run its races, and which was counteracted to all of the amateur athletic rules at the time, but we still felt they could run, and those that did continue to be wonderful athletes for the track and field and long distance running. And ultimately, of course, we got an Olympic marathon later on, which I wasn't directly involved in at that point, but the women themselves got it going and got it a wonderful effect where Joan Benoit won the first one in the world. So it was wonderful.
So what was the issue for women runners that when this was all happening? It was the late 60s, early 70s.
What began to happen in the late 50s, certain wives were involved in joining with their husbands to get involved. Like Sarah Mae Berman from Boston area, and she loved the running things, but she couldn't run because the rules were against running more than 2 to 3 miles in cross country and a half mile on a track. So we, and then in the New York area, we had women that were running. Nina Cusick was one of the first ones. Kathy Switzer, Patricia Nell Warren, who's a novelist herself, got herself running when she was husband was a runner, and they just sort of a wonderful example that women were allowed to run. And Nina Cusick went down to Puerto Rico to be the only woman ever to run a road race in Puerto Rico. And they weren't letting other women in, but since she was Puerto Rican background, they let her come down and run against in the men's race. But then she said, well, what's the matter with women? And that started the whole process down there. So we just spread it across the country, and each area of the country began to accept the women as being legitimate entries. I changed the amateur athletic rules for the Amateur Athletic Union to allow that to happen, and blocked many coaches from stopping the women from running because they had all sorts of ideas about it, and then many people had thought pregnancy things and all that other stuff was in the way. But I'm a biologist, and I could point to them very clearly. None of that has anything to do with being an athlete, and it just blew away. And by the time end of the 60s, come all the sports are increasingly allowing women into a run, which was wonderful. So that's a great thing of my history too, and others other than myself. Because like Ted Corbett, a great black amateur athlete, were around and pushing these things all around the country and the world. So it's quite an accomplishment to work with all those men and women over the years to do something like that.
So in the world of running, it sounds like there was some discrimination. There was the discrimination, of course, the gender discrimination, the color or race discrimination.
Yeah. Well, well, running was less than most places, believe it or not, because as far as race things are concerned, the black athlete was very important in racing, particularly in the sprint areas. But the guys like Ted Corbett, who were pioneers in the African Americans going long distances, were big, especially in the United States. Long distance runners were known very well in Africa, because, matter of fact, most of them weren't long distance runners. They weren't good in the sprints. In the hybridization between the various races, it made changes from a biological point of view of the abilities to vary your muscle capacities, and so in the Western world, most of them were in the sprints, but we found out that the talents were there too, and so we went that way. And the same with the women. The women actually have greater endurance than men over many distances, and although they don't run as fast because of the muscle change in puberty, they have their talents of maintaining themselves over a long period of time are exceptional, and that we were able to show throughout the world, and thus build the whole program. And the other countries joined in finally. Britain was involved very early, and as you saw what our athletes did, they went ahead and put out teams, which was wonderful to see.
So it's interesting because with your biology background, you could basically say there's no biological reason for any of these so-called rules and regulations that people were putting out there at that time. That's really interesting. Now, you've been running, nearly 72 years?
I've been since 48, yeah. Well, running, I haven't competed all that time because I got to the point, actually in 87, where I got myself totally exhausted and got a very bad case of pneumonia from work I was doing, and my lungs got wiped out for about 5 years, so I couldn't compete again. So I stopped competing. But my last race was in '87, and I didn't race from there. I would play around, but not race. So from '48 to '87 was pretty much the time of my active running career. So I pretty much had a long running career. I enjoyed every bit of it. I was a decent runner. I basically enjoyed the running more than the competing, although I could compete when I had to. And I won several championships once in a while. So, but it was fun, and the real fun thing was the fact that the distance running guys were people that wanted to change, wanted to grow, wanted people to love the whole idea that running a long distance run is really not good for you. We had to counteract that, and that we didn't break our hearts and hurt our this and hurt us that. And with the women, is always creating some problem with their uterus or the other false compensation they did. And of course, we know that women pretty much can run many of them past the 6th run of pregnancy and without any injury. So this was known, but it was always ignored. And finally, the women themselves just demonstrated they could do it, and they did it, and it was wonderful that way.
Well, that's really wonderful that you were able to support all of those different athletes. What was the deal with running in Central Park? I read that somewhere where at one point runners were not allowed in Central Park. What was that all about?
Well, years ago, before Lindsay administration, the park was always closed because of it was a very important traffic control device of moving people from the northern part of Manhattan to the southern part of Manhattan, basically. And so the tremendous amount of voice by everybody about providing bad cause of the chance of running around. But Lindsay was working on the idea of opening the parks to walking and doing this and doing that. And they did. They opened it to bikes and to walkers, but not to runners. And yeah, we were running in parks. I mean, I ran through Central Park since I could run. And there's nice places to run. We used to use a bridle path to run on that. We had the reservoir area, things like that, and the asphalt paths around the park were a terrific place to run. They're safe, no cars that way. So we did that. And when they opened the park to the bikers and to walkers on the weekends, they wouldn't open to us. I, at that time, I was the president of the Roadrunners Club. And I said, what do you mean? Well, there's nobody runners. There are no runners. There are only, the bikes and walking is better. We just interfere with them and what was going on, and which was kind of annoying. But I just kept fighting. But the politics were against me, and the recreation commissioner at that time was Hayes Jones, who was an Olympic athlete. That Lindsay talked into doing the job, but he couldn't do anything about anything. They gave him no power, and so I just kept pushing. And let's see what something happened. Let's see. Oh yeah. Well, what happened was I was trying to get into the park, put on some race. They wouldn't let us do it. We had one race relative to the park, which was the American Dairy Society's milk run, which we started down at 14th Street, ran up to once around Central Park, and ended at 59th Street. That's the only one we could put in, and I was trying to put in races there, and they said no. And then Fred Lebo was one of the new athletes in the area, and he was screaming, "Why don't you guys run things in Central Park?" And I says, "We can't. We have all these problems." And so he had talked to a lot of people screaming and yelling, "Oh, this thing." And finally, he found out that I was in charge of everything, so he came to me and he said he represented a group of millionaire runners. Now, of course, I know everybody who ran, and I knew there weren't any millionaire runners, and only one guy that was a millionaire was the head of the American Dairy Association. And I said, well, so he says, "What? How are you going to do this?" He says, "Well, I'm going to point out I got these millionaires I want to put up a race." So I said, "Okay, why don't you do this? You go to the Parks Commissioner and you get us an appointment, and tell them that you represent these guys." Okay, and I said, "Don't mention my name. Just tell them you have an internationally known marathon director, which is me." And so we did this, and so we got this appointment with Hayes Jones, Hayes, and to meet him to talk about putting a race in Central Park by millionaires. We get there. Because I realized Fred, he was a good advertising guy, and so forth. And so, but I figured if we could play this right, who knows? So we're going to go visit Hayes, and as we're going up the steps of the Arsenal in Central Park, Hayes is leaving. So he says, "Where are you going?" "We got a meeting with you." So he says, "Oh yeah, I figured it was going to be you." So when he heard about it, he said, "No, I just quit. All the stuff you pointed about, I could never get done. I can't get done, so I'm quitting." But what was good about that was that we were sent in to see his sixth assistant, which was Herman Badillo's campaign manager. That's how he kept alive. He worked for the Parks Department between campaigns, and he knew nothing about anything. And very fortunately, he says, "Well, it's a great idea. If you got millionaires to donate money to the park, and you can put a race that will do it. I don't know anything about it. Speak to these two guys." And so we went to speak to two guys who were Park Department professionals, Dave Lassane and Joe Retzberg. And they thought it was a great idea. He said, "It's not going to work." I said, "Well, we don't care if it's going to work. What do you think?" He says, "Tell you what, let's sit down and plan a marathon in the park." So they sat down with the typewriter, and I dictated 7 pages of how to put a race on in Central Park. And he says, "Let's see if we can get it okayed." So they went to the Central Park commissioner, who hated my guts because I was drove him crazy. And he didn't see what he was signing, so he signs this thing up and he hands it back to them. And he says, "What am I doing? What are you signing for?" He says, "Oh, you just signed a permit to put a race in Central Park." So, and they said, "It's not Chiappetta, is it?" So they walked out and he brought me this form, this whole thing. He says, "Here, this is your copy. Now, with that number, what you're going to do is to get the forms for a permit, put that number on, anything you want." And that started the whole process of getting into Central Park. And from then on, we just went for it because all our running courses were getting blocked by buses put into Cedric Avenue. Vancouver Park was too small to run these road races. And such. Once we got the permit, we started putting in races and it just built into the big thing it was. And one of the ones we wanted to do was a marathon. So we said a marathon. So we started the New York City Marathon on September 13th, 1970. And then this is June already. So we have this short period of time to set it up. So I typed up a entry blank, and I put Fred's name on it because I didn't trust him because he promised he pay for the prizes. And Fred's roommaker says, "Well, do something. He's committed, so he can get away from it." So I put his name on an entry blank. When I put his name on an entry blank, it was so enamored of the whole idea. He saw this thing, so he guaranteed the prizes. We put the entry blank out. We sent it out to as many people as we could find, and we had about 150 people plus 2 women that entered, and 126 started, and about 70 finished it. And we put the first New York City Marathon in Central Park in 1970, and it was a big success because what was interesting was that nothing was going on in the park, and the Daily News guys came around because they heard about women running. The New York Times sent Al Harvin, one of their reporters, to follow it, and they came and covered the race. And it was a dead weekend, and the Daily News put 2/3 of the central forward with pictures of the marathon, which that's all it was fantastic. You know, we got all that play and a nice article by Al Harvin and New York City Independent Times on Monday, and it just started. It just from there, people started hearing about it, and more would write us and say, we'd like to run the New York City Marathon, we'd like to come to it, and it just gradually built from Central Park, and then by 1976, by 1975, it was too big to run in the park, and we were able to get Percy Sutton, the borough president, and one of the reporters on the New York newspaper, East Side newspaper there. No, I just forgot his name. Great guy. And so Percy talked Mayor Beam into giving us a permit to have a 5-borough marathon. And that started us off. The 75 one, Percy was the starter for the marathon. He came, and he said it was a wonderful thing. Being finally agreed to have the 5-borough marathon, and we went out there, guys went out and just tried to find the safest, easiest course we could make the first time, ending up, couldn't block traffic. We ended up running up the East River Drive pathway, the first one, going to the Bronx, then coming down into Fifth Avenue and finishing there. And what was great about that was New York City was in a mess. Remember, they owed so much money. It was a total economic fallout there. And two things happened in 1976: op sale for the anniversary of the country, and New York City Marathon. They both got international play all over the world. And after that, they didn't quibble about the marathon. As Percy said, look, what do we talk about? Op sale and the marathon. So you got to give permission. So from then on, we got permission to run the marathon in about 5 boroughs, and we could change the whole course into the one we have now. And that was the history of that. That just became a beautiful thing. And then
wow.
each marathon got bigger and bigger and bigger. So
it started out with, you said, 152 people. And
153. We entered.
Right, entered.
126 started.
Right.
And somewhere around 70 finished. I forget the exact number.
And did any of the women who started finish that?
Well, they all no. Well, no, none of them finished. Nina Cusick would have won it, but she had to take care of it. She had 3 kids. And the kids, and so she worried about the kids, and I was coming by her and saying, "Now you got to finish. I can't. I got to worry about the kids," because her husband was running, and he took no responsibility for anything. And so I said, "No, finish." But she felt guilty about her responsibilities for the kids, so she didn't finish. She finished the next ones, but. So that what she would, and of course, for years she regretted the sense that she didn't do it. But that's what happens in life, and women always take the brunt of these things.
That is interesting how people they don't do things because they feel they have to responsibilities. So now, 50 years later, how many people participate in the New York City Marathon?
Over 50,000.
Over 50,000 people? Wow. So that little run turned into something pretty phenomenal. And now I know that you've been interviewed by the BBC and lots of big media outlets. have been very interested in interviewing you. And then, of course, this next year with the 50th anniversary coming up, are there any big plans that you know of?
Well, remember, I'm not. Gradually, what ended up happening was I was an emeritus member of the board because I wanted to get new people in, and then the later board decided that they don't need emeritus members, so they dropped us out of the board, and so I have no contact with that. Once in a while, someone calls me up and says something, asks for a question or something like that. So I'm not involved with the management anymore. That's going on, and the new management claims they want to keep me in contact, and whatever they do, that's what they do. What they're going to do, everything's going on. I have nothing about. So if I find out about it, it would be probably at the end of the summer, whatever they're going to do. It's in someone else's hand, and you can't. I mean, you have to realize that history moves on. The past is very annoying to the present because you never feel that you're getting credit for what you're doing in the present because the past is there, and so the tendency is to ignore the past. Without the past, you have no future. So, but these are the normal things that go on. So, and so I'm not interfering with what they do. The main function is that what we built is still running and still producing quality program for runners. And then still involved with the worldwide running world, which is very important. We were very much a big part of that, and so forth. And that's what counts. So what you started and helped to build into something you can be proud of. And I can always look back and say, it's just wonderful seeing the people and get a benefit out of what we started, and that's very beautiful.
Yes. Well, that's a perfect segue into talking about your book, and because obviously you're very creative, and besides running, you've written these book of poetry with the artwork, and you published that in 2017. And I wanted to ask you about New York as we know it. What does that mean, that your title of your poetry and art, New York as we know it? What does that mean?
Well, obviously, it's the emotions and feelings of being a New Yorker and being involved in events around New York in my life, and how it's affected me, and my methodology of communication to myself as well as anybody else who wants to read it is poetry, and the artwork is part of my expression of myself for these things, and so as we know it was, well, in a sense, me as a person, we, and anybody else who may think of it this way, and that's what it means. Actually, it does have in other words, it's sort of like if you're talking about your wife. Men and women, people who are married to each other have a view of each other no one else knows, and then you're trying to express that to others to get them to enjoy the beauty of a relationship, say, in that way. And it's a relationship, and being part of New York and its history of part of it in some way. And I just put my emotions together in these things. These are mostly things that happen in New York. I have a lot of love poetry I'm trying to get rid of. I got also many more new observations, and these we put together with the artwork to see what happened. And so the artwork. When did you do the artwork for this? Is this? Oh, some of it's very recent. Some of it is, well, in the 60s. I was looking somehow. For some reason or other, I always like to nibble and put dribbles on a page or something like that. Something. I don't have enough artwork. I was on fellowships. I had very little money, and I said, why don't I just draw my own stuff, just play around with it? So I got myself some pads and pen and inks, and started playing around with it. And that evolved into what these are, and it's just my sense of color and design, what I think of, what I see, or just what catches me as it's very much involved with form and design and color. And it's non-representational. I'm not trying to particularly make a particular view of something, but just my feelings of putting together these geometries, forms, and color. And that's what involved. Some look like the covering of it has these looking like little apartment houses things I played with and things like that.
Well, that's what I noticed about your art, was that it was, it added a lot of interest, visual interest to the work as I was looking at it. I wanted to ask you again, your poems. I noticed that they're, I think almost every one I read was dated. And they range from like the 60s into the 80s, and I mean, I didn't look at every single one, but for example, I just wanted to read 100 Miles at Shea, and I just wanted you to, if you could just talk and tell me about it after I read it.
Yeah, hold on a second. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just to kind of, so that we can have our listeners kind of get a visual sense. Yeah. Of what you're talking about, because, for example, I'm not a New Yorker, but when I was reading this, I could visualize some of the things, and then even a grapefruit parable, that's a very thought-provoking, and then a June Park day, because your images are so broad and bold, and I want to read 100 Miles at Shea and ask you about that, and then I wanted to also ask you about how you write your poetry, because I just think it's interesting, the creative process. So here's this is 100 Miles at Shea, and this was written June 17th, 1983. Leather legs lift in an arc of low degree, as wet faces, shirts, painted voice, crawl on a single, file singular unit lives, miles of 100, a struggle into morning oblivion of laps around the Shea Time Stadium, rocked with music of uncertain value, stacking knees alongside aches we never knew could blue us, as sun's burning bright lights were crowded over day the long night, journey into a day and 100 milers. And of course, since I didn't write this, I may not have even read it correctly, but tell me about that.
About which? What, the race? The race?
About what this poem is about.
Okay. Well, in those days, we put down the first 100-mile runs in New York City, and we were able to get Shea Stadium to allow us to use the stadium itself and the parking lot to run 1 mile loops around it, 100 laps of a 100-mile race, which we were putting on at that time. And the Shea Stadium people allowed us to do it. And so running 100 times 1 mile around a parking lot and this field of a baseball park. And of course, this just the leather lays as you run a long race. And I wasn't running; I was the meet director. But what ends up happening gradually, you're battling the aspects of fatigue in your whole body and your legs, and the lift of your legs, of course, changes over time. The shirts are wet. your voice is getting crawly and things like that. And we start the race. We used to start the race at about 6 o'clock at night and run overnight the whole time. See, and then usually finish somewhere after. It depends how good you were after 12 hours or more, and so therefore you finish with the sun. You start with the sun going down. You finish with the sun coming up over the night, and the various. You got cloud nights. You got different parts of the day of the journey that you do. That's the basic sense of it. So it's putting together the emotions, the feelings, the tiredness, the exhilaration as you realize you're getting closer and closer to the finish. It gets to be very exciting for most people at around 80 miles. Funny thing, that's not very exciting about it. But all of a sudden you realize, knowing your ability, knowing your strength, that you could probably get it done, say. And that's very exhilarating in any long race. The realization you can reach a point where you can get it done if you keep going. And that's basically the emotion.
Wow, I'm so glad.
And this was in June. This was in June where we had the race.
Yeah, June 17th, 1983. Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you about that because, I can read your poetry, but again, not knowing the backstory, but hearing the backstory makes it so much, more fascinating to me because I can imagine. I'm not a runner. I was one of those people that if I tried to run around the track, I'd get a side ache. Well, you
got to run long enough to get rid of the side ache.
But to imagine that 100 miles of going around that 100 times. The track I remember at my high school, I think must have been a quarter mile, so you would have had to run around that 400 times.
Yes, right. Which is why we don't do it on tracks usually.
Yeah, but that really is beautiful because now I can really visualize what the meaning is behind that, and that's the thing about poetry. Is, every person would get a different thing from it, but it is really a beautiful thing, and I really appreciate that. And then you had another one that you wrote in. This one was July 28th. June 28th, 1971. It's called the June Park Day. And this one says, breeze-blown trees sift uneasy overhead of Washington Square. Peopled walks click heel along soft-voiced couples, talking time away together as wearied feet take respite. From hard surface to hard buttock sitting bench to blow smoke cigarette, inspired pouting of pixie, hair set, eyes steady, in space femme, touring map aside New York, big sore-footed, on a breezy cool day called June. Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it's just beautiful in terms of some of the imagery. So tell me about a June Park Day.
Yeah, hold on a second. I need a book out here.
I like the line inspired.
What was the date again? 80, I missed it. I forgot the date.
28th of June, 71.
Oh, okay. I forgot the order here.
I think it may have been like the first five poems in your book.
Yeah, hold on. June Park Day.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It is. I was in Washington Square Park, which is that park in NYU, surrounds NYU, in southern Manhattan there, and it's in the sense the campus of NYU down there, and it's a place I taught there for quite a while, and I used to live down on 3rd Street, so it was nice to sit in the park and just think of ideas and then sit down and in a sense watch the people. And so I have quite a few poems from that, but I haven't had a chance to publish them. And this one was just one of. What I did was, I said I couldn't make a decision which to pay which poems to use. I let my assistant pick the poems because this way I wouldn't be in the middle of it. And this is one of those things. Yes, this is very typical of Washington Square Park, because often, with all the buildings around, you start getting these breezes here and there, and it just sets you up to see what's going on. And the trees do move both winter and summer, and I was just looking at the people around me and watching people smoking, blowing cigarettes, the pouting pixie, as I call it, a female, the way her hair was set, things like that, and then the names of people, and because I don't know their names, so that's why I said, well, on a breezy, cool day called June, is that her name? The imagery of not knowing the person, but maybe communicating some way to that person.
Wow, that's really beautiful. So one of the things that you have said about your book is that you carried a pad with you. Like, did you carry this with you while you were running, as well as?
Well, this one I was sitting down, but I know, and I put a pen and a pen in my pants pocket when I run, and if I think of something while I'm running, I'll sit down and write. You know what happens when you're thinking, phrases come out of your head, and so you write it down. And there's still many I haven't even touched yet, but they're sitting there. And when I'm thinking or about something or whatever, or a phrase comes to my mind again, I go look it up. And if I want to use it or not use it, it's a creative thing. When you're creating something, phrases come into your head, and sometimes you can use the past, sometimes you can't. So.
Right.
Yeah. And
so you've mentioned it quite a few times that you've got a bunch more poetry, like you said that you've written a lot of love poetry and other types of poetry.
Yeah.
Are you planning on publishing some more of your poetry?
Well, I'm hoping to. I still keep a very busy life since I'm still teaching. And so my energy is getting lower, so I have to watch.
Where do you teach again?
At Yeshiva University and Bronx Community College.
Okay. Yeah, well, teaching is a lot of work.
If you do a good job, it is, yes.
Yeah.
And I have difficulty not trying to do the best I can, so.
Yeah, because it's a lot of work, and like you said, when you're trying to, really do a good job, it can take a lot of energy. So in your adventures, so you've lived in New York, I take it, are you a lifelong New Yorker?
Yeah, except for a few years. I lived in Port Washington for a while, and but pretty much I've lived in New York all my life, yeah.
So of all of obviously you have a long list of legacy that you're leaving behind or that you've helped create. I mean, certainly the New York City Marathon can be, listed right up there, along with helping women get involved in races on a more equal footing. Of all of your accomplishments, as you look at your life, what strikes you as being the most important?
Oh, well, in those aspects of my life, I don't know. I never looked at it, and you don't look at your life doing anything. You just do, and whatever happens. Sometimes you have control. At times, your circumstance that work out. I'm not planning to do anything in the sense of other than living and being a decent person with people, and hopefully doing right by them. Other things happen because circumstances pop up, and you want, okay, that's a good idea, let's go do it, type of thing. My basic plan in life is to try to do what's right as a person, and hopefully, with some edge, make some people happy that I can love and care for, and that's about all I can do. And hopefully, not destroy anybody. So my basic function in life is that you want to do what's right. I'm a very strong believer in the Bible as a book of truth and ideas, and I try to convey most of those things.
That's really beautiful. Well, I just want to remind everyone that they can find your book, New York as We Know It. It's available on Amazon, and it's available in both the paperback version and in the Kindle version, which, of course, the Kindle version is the digital version that
right.
You can download and read on your phone or on a tablet or on your computer. And then, of course, the paperback, you can get paperback version for it. But I really enjoyed looking through your poems, and I certainly hope that you share more of your poetry and your art with the world beyond New York as we know it. And it's been a great pleasure talking with you today. And again, it's really interesting to know that, just the love of running has opened so many doors for so many people, and that now the New York City Marathon, something that started with a little more than 150 people is now 50,000 people participating in that. That's quite a huge number of people coming out to run every year. So thank you so much, Vincent. I really appreciated all the time you took with me today.
Well, thank you so much for the privilege, and hopefully that maybe somebody will read the book. That'd be nice.
Yeah, well, poetry, it's one of those things that, some people appreciate it, some people, don't. But what I really did appreciate that you did today is that, just the couple poems that we discussed, that you actually shared that background about them, like the 100 miles at Shea Stadium, that really brought that to life for me personally, to know that. So I really appreciate that you shared that with me and my audience today. That was really special, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and poetry is maligned because of the way it's taught in school and things like that. And many people really have abilities to write things down for fun. What do you feel about yourself, or what you like, and redoing it with yourself, or rereading it. It's fun to share. And poetry is one of those areas of sharing. And then the innuendo that you're putting into the poem, you can then express when you talk to people. That's why poetry readings are such great things for people when they do that. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like something that you should do. Is you should go do some poetry readings and then share some of that insider information about each poem, because like I said, I just really got a lot out of that explanation, because of the fact that, I don't have a real reference personally, but when you explained it, I mean, I was right there even though I've never been to Shea Stadium, I was there. I could visualize that whole scenario, and I could even feel like my legs getting tired, and at the 80-mile mark going, hey man, you've done 80, you can do another 20. You know, I was right there in feeling I could do it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, these are all things you don't have control over, but it's fun to do when you can do it. So that's nice. I really appreciate your attitude, and nice talking to you as a person. And
thank you.
And I hope that, who knows, maybe it'll continue again.
Well, I will invite you back, and we can talk about more exciting things in the future. I mean, we barely scratched, of your background in running and about all the different things that you do. And sometime maybe I'll even talk to you about your background in biology and your biology books. Okay,
well, that'd be fun. Yes, thank you.
Because that's a topic that it's interesting too that we could talk about. So thank you so much, Vincent.
Well, thank you for calling, and nice talking to you.
Okay, everyone, this is Tammy Patzer, and we've been speaking with the legendary co-founder of the New York City Marathon and the author of the best-selling poetry book, New York as We Know It, Vincent Chiappetta. So thank you, everyone. This is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a beautiful day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.